Hello fellow lovers of the liminal and weird, and welcome to another video by Liminal Spaces. Today we're going to be talking about a short story by Norman Spinrad, and it is called No Direction Home. This is a copy of the short story collection that was named after this specific story. It's got a great cover, really unique cover. I was able to grab this recently off of eBay, and it is in really great condition. I took my notes on my phone, which I don't usually like to do, but I was in a place where I didn't have my notebook, so I did have to take my notes on my phone. So I'm going to be holding my phone through this. For that, I apologize. We'll start with a really quick plot synopsis. In this story, Spinrad presents a psychedelic utopia where every aspect of life is governed by which drugs you take. Psychedelic designers are the best paid artists of the day, and even children are raised on a regiment of mind-altering hallucinogens. But some of the citizens of this supposed utopia are beginning to wonder if this really is the best way to live life. Through 7 vignettes, Spinrad unravels scenarios that lead us, the reader, to make value or moral judgments on whether or not this is actually a utopia or a dystopia. But before I get into exactly what I thought of the story, I'd like to take a quick look at its publication history. Norman Spinrad is an American science fiction writer. He grew up in New York, and around 1970, he was looking to publish a novel that he had written called Bug Jack Barron. And unfortunately, he was having a really hard time publishing this novel because none of the American publishers would even touch it. Specifically because of its language, the use of cuss words, explicit sexual scenes, and its pessimistic critique of politicians. So he was trying to find anywhere to publish this, and it wasn't working out. And finally, Michael Moorcock, who is a science fiction writer based out of the UK, but more importantly at that time was the editor of New World Science Fiction magazine. And Michael Moorcock was very forward-thinking and was specifically trying to create a new name for sci-fi. He really is the one that started the new wave and had, I feel like, the most effect on the new wave of science fiction. And he started publishing in installments Norman Spinrad's novel. Unfortunately, at the time he was publishing this, New Worlds magazine was partially funded by the Arts Council of Great Britain. And Moorcock's inclusion of Spinrad created a huge debate in Parliament, specifically about whether or not the government should be funding work that was considered smutty or terrible at the time. This was a huge debate. It's really interesting story. I mean, I just fell down a rabbit hole by putting in New World Science Fiction magazine, starting at the wiki and then going further and further and further out. It's a great story. So if you're interested, go check that out. Eventually, their funding was not taken away. They were able to keep funding, and he kept publishing Spinrad. And in September of 1971, in the New Worlds Quarterly number 2, which is where I discovered this story, he published the story we're talking about today, which is No Direction Home. Of course, the title of this story is an homage to Bob Dylan. I didn't realize this, but this is New Worlds magazine. This really confused me because I thought when I picked it up that it was an anthology of the best stories from New Worlds, but it is not. This is an American publication. The publishing house Berkeley published these quarterlies, but they would do basically a novel-size collection of short stories quarterly. So this is what the magazine looked like, although this is the American print of it. So I was surprised to find that this is the first publication of the story No Direction Home. It was then featured in quite a few best of science fiction anthologies, best of the year 71 and so on and so forth, until finally in 1975 it was published in No Direction Home, which is where it found its home after that. This is where you can really find this story easily. So that's how this story came to be. This is an incredible story, and it brings up a lot of philosophical and existential questions. And while Spinrad answers them in the text of the story, he answers them in a way that is vague enough that allows us to also question what we think about these ideas and whether or not we think the utopia he's presented to us is indeed a utopia, or if this is a dystopia. It is absolutely worth a read. If you're watching this video to find something new to read, yeah, go find this and read it. It's really, really incredible. I'm not going to rate these anymore just because I always give them 8s or 9s. At the end of the year, I'm going to do a best of all the novels I read, best of all the short stories I read. So that's when you can see all the rankings, so look forward to that. I'm just going to recommend or not recommend these, and I absolutely recommend this one. So from here on out, I am going to be doing plot spoilers. If you want to read this book, go give it a read. The next part of this video will be my interpretation and deep reading of this text, so the entire thing will be spoiled. Like I said earlier, this story is broken up into 7 little vignettes. And what I mean by that is they're just glimpses, almost microfictions, although some are a little bit longer than others, that demonstrate the world, not in a traditional plot, right, where you have the inverted check mark, where you have the rising action and the climax and then the denouement. Instead, this just gives you little tiny snapshots into people's lives. None of them are connected. That allows you to see how this world works. It also invites us to judge whether or not this is a utopia or a dystopia. And I thought that was really part of the fun of this short story, is that I was constantly being asked to question whether or not I agreed with what these people were talking about. So we're just going to break it down vignette by vignette. So the story starts with 2 small drug dealers. And they invent, it's not really illegal what they do because this is a psychedelic medicated society. But they are not sponsored by corporations. So they are really the smallest kids on the block in this case. And they are creating psychedelic designer drugs. And they're buddies, and they're just chatting about all the old psychedelic trips they've created, the designer drugs they've created. And then they start talking about the fact that maybe they should have patented them. And of course, the one guy says, well, we could never patent them. We don't have any of the draw of being a big business. So it starts to look at the concept of a medicated society in capitalism, right? This is not a dictatorship that forces drugs on all the people. This is a capitalist society that is pushing medication, but it is not forcing, it's not legally forcing anybody to take psychedelics, just everybody does. And every part of the government is structured to push them towards doing that, but not ever to take away their right to choose whether they want to or not. Everybody just chooses to do so. So these small designers, these small drug designers can't compete in the world when there's huge corporations, which we'll get into in a bit, that also design hallucinogenic drugs. But what's interesting is these guys are the real influencers, in the sense that they get their stuff out there, and then eventually the corporations will get their hands on their stuff and reverse engineer and then release a version of the thing that they made through their company and make billions of dollars off of it. And these 2 designers are bemoaning the fact that they can't really make this money because they can't patent it, because they don't have the backing of a major corporation. But in the end, one of them kind of gives an impassioned speech, which also feels like a lot of rationalization, but And each of the vignettes are like this. They all end with this rationalization slash philosophical understanding that makes them okay with where they are in their life. And the one guy's rationalization or philosophical understanding is that it's good that they can't make a patent on these, because if they were able to patent them, they would just become capitalist fat cats and would stop having any artistic drive and would just get rich off of one of the drugs that they've made. But he says, no, we're actually kind of lucky because we are able to help man along in evolution by creating perceptions. So we are stepping humanity through evolution of consciousness by the art that we make, that are these drugs. And you'll find that this is a theme throughout the entire story, this idea that the people that make the drugs create consciousnesses for people that are considered pieces of art. So he says, and we're lucky that we get to do this again and again and again, because we have to survive, because we can never make enough money off of our creations, because all the money goes to the big corporations. So that's how he kind of rationalizes that he's glad that they're not making a chunk of money off of making these drugs. So that is our first introduction to this medicated society that we get, are these two entrepreneurs that can't really make a lot of money because they do not have the sponsorship or the backing of large corporations. The next section is a general from the military speaking to a person from a psychedelic corporation, one of these big corporations we're talking about. And he is coming to complain about the fact that the drug that they had created for him was specifically made for people, I think on Mars or the moon, I can't remember. But the company had specifically made drugs for him for soldiers to combat claustrophobia in very cramped quarters in space. And while the drug does help with claustrophobia, the reason that the general's coming down is because also it's been acting as a major aphrodisiac. So all of the soldiers are just in space having sex with each other and ignoring their work. So he says this cannot work. This just cannot work. And the corporation guy starts telling him, well, this you got like 2 or 3 options here. There's really 2 or 3 options that you have to accept. Number 1, you have to accept that everybody's going to get super claustrophobic if you don't give them the drugs. Number 2, you're going to have to accept the fact that you can get rid of the claustrophobia, but then you're going to have to deal with the soldiers having sex with each other. Number 3, you can find a new drug. And he says, and we just happen to have a new drug that can help with this. He says the problem is this drug is giving them an excess of sexual energy, and we just need to reroute that energy. So there's a new drug that the company has created that will put these people on a mystical trip, and that puts them in a fugue state. So they take the drug, and for 4 hours they're just gone, and they go into this huge mystical state in their brain. And the general says, okay, but what do they see in this fugue state? Because he's worried about his soldiers seeing anti-military, anti-loyalty stuff. And the guy says, I've taken it myself, and this is the best part about it. Once you wake up from the fugue state and the mystical experience, you will not remember any of it. So it will draw all their energy, their sexual energy, and push it into a mysticism, and then it will release in this fugue state. And then, and I don't know if this is just a side effect of the psychedelic or if he's trying to really redirect this energy, but basically people that take this and into the fugue state and come out of it not remembering anything for the next week, they don't really have any sexual drive whatsoever. So he says, so give them the medicine that makes them not claustrophobic, and then also give them this, and you'll lose them for 4 hours. they'll be useless to you for 4 hours, but after that 4 hours, they will not have, they won't have a sex drive that you'll have to worry about. And the general, of course, is very happy with this. I think this vignette was included to show how much everything in the society is about fine-tuning the doses of what you take. And this was a huge idea. And of course, anybody that's ever taken hallucinogens know that it's really difficult to guess how a person is going to react on a hallucinogen. And I know that Stanislaw Lem was into this concept as well, that you can control people's hallucinations and their mindsets by designing through chemistry how these drugs work, which just really isn't true. But it was an idea that was huge in the late 60s, and this is definitely an artifact of that era. So yeah, the society fine-tunes their doses to create the behavior that they want out of people. The next vignette is about two people that are I don't know if they're in love. They're about two people that are deciding to make love. And this is really the trippiest and one of my favorite sections of this, because although this is about hallucination, Spinrad uses hallucinogenic prose very sparsely. And that's another thing I wanted to say about this book. It's very interesting to me. If you put this next to, say, Philip K. Dick and The Three Stigmatas of Palmer Eldritch, or if you put it next to Stanislaw Lem's Futurological Congress, a lot of the hallucinations happen in people's heads. In this book, Spinrad seems to really prefer to lay everything out through dialogue. So it's a different journey. The prose isn't as trippy as those other ones, except for in this section. And this is two people deciding that they want to make love, but they're both on different hallucinogenics at the time. So they are trying to decide if their trips can line up and allow them to make love. And it's this totally new consideration that this society has to consider when deciding if they want to make love or not, right? Is will our trips line up? Are we on the same stuff, or are we on compatible stuff? But beyond that, the way that he describes how the woman looks to the man and how the man looks to the woman and how they are lining up in this cosmic consciousness is really interesting. And I'm not going to try to break it down because really I think it's meant to just be read as poetry and just be really beautiful. And that it is. It's one of the, I think, most rewarding of the vignettes. Number 4 is the one that he spends the most time on, and that is a vignette about religion. And this is two cardinals having a meeting. One is the cardinal. I don't know much about Catholicism. One is the Cardinal of New York, and another is a cardinal that's been sent from the Pope to talk to the cardinal in New York. And he's telling the cardinal in New York that the Pope is not happy about the cardinal in New York using psychedelics in, I think it's called Holy Communion, in the crackers and the wine. So the New York host has started adding psychedelics to communion. And the Pope's not really happy about this. And this is, I think, the longest vignette, because this is where he unpacks a huge philosophical statement. And that statement is, I'm going to explain this in the easiest way I can, is that the concept of the Pope and excommunication doesn't really matter to the New York Cardinal anymore, because by adding psychedelics to the sacrament, that's the word I was looking for, by adding psychedelics to the sacrament, people are able to connect directly with God. So he said excommunication isn't scary and faith is no longer important. because when you add psychedelics to the sacrament, the people connect directly to God and are able to feel and communicate with God directly. Therefore, the concept of the Pope disliking psychedelics in the sacrament isn't important. I hope sacrament's the right word. Let me know in the comments if I'm screwing all this up. Because they've cut out the middlemen. The psychedelics allow people to connect directly with God. This is the same idea that Philip K. Dick and Roger Zelazny expressed in Deus Irae. Hopefully I said that right. But it's interesting because, and I feel like Dick wrote this part of the novel. This is just my bias. It just seems, the voice seems similar to the other Dick stuff that I've read. Dick goes into this guy's brain who's trying to cook up all his own concoctions and lays out this philosophy over page after page that is so deep and so beautifully written. And Norman Spinrad does it in a economy of language, and he does it mainly through dialogue. And I like the fact that both of these books, during these parts of them, are discussing the exact same thing, and you can see two different ways of doing things. And you can even try to think about which you prefer. I can't really do that because I like them both. I think they're both incredible examples of how to discuss philosophical concepts in a text. But it is really unique to see these ideas from two different people. The fifth vignette is about child rearing. And it's about a woman who's brought her son to her pediatrician and is worried because the school, her son has just started school, and the school is suggesting a different prescription for her son. So we learn that even from a young age, children are given psychedelics in this society. And the doctor is talking to her and thinking about the fact that this school doctor is a failed pediatrician and doesn't know the first thing about psychedelics. And he is putting the mother's mind at ease by saying, even though your school doctor is saying we need to decrease psychedelics, we're actually going to increase them. We just need to keep fine-tuning them in order to get him in the right mindset to enjoy and be at school. This is a terrifying chapter because we're dealing with children, of course. But it also shows us that the type of fine-tuning that we saw that was going on with the military in this society starts all the way from childhood. That they start messing with perception from that far back. The sixth vignette is, I feel like, the second most important one, and it is the second longest. This time we get two drug designers, just like we did at the beginning, but these two drug designers are the most famous drug designers in the society. They are artists and they live like kings. And one of them is having a bit of a crisis and is feeling like he should quit designing psychedelics. So he goes and he talks to the older fella who is his mentor. And he says, I'm thinking about quitting. And he says, why would you want to quit? We are artists that are paid wonderfully, and we are artists that get to use as our medium reality. We get to use people's consciousnesses as our art. It's incredible. And the young man, through their back and forth, begins to explain that he feels that it is morally wrong to mess with people's perceptions. And the mentor comes back with a very capitalist concept. He says, hey, number one, we are artists and people get to choose whether or not they like our art. If they don't like the drugs we create, they don't take them. So there you go. Free choice exists. Number two, if we didn't make the drugs, somebody else would. So these drugs are getting made either way. And number three, we are artists and not awful politicians that just want to control people. So we're actually creating work that people want to experience instead of these evil politicians that would just make drugs that would force people to do what they wanted them to do. And they go back and forth a little bit further, and they eventually get to the idea that the young man expresses, and he says, I feel like we are pushing evolution forward, that we are changing people's consciousnesses without any idea where we're heading. There's no destination in mind. We're just getting stranger and stranger and going further and further into the future and continuously changing people's consciousness. And he says, we have no anchor. We don't know what reality is. And finally he gets to the idea that, wait a minute, there is a right and real reality that was there before all the psychedelics. And it was a reality that was created through evolutionary happenstance. And his mentor reacts angrily and says, why is that the real reality? Why does that have to be the real reality? Because it came first? That reality is nothing more than just things happened by coincidence and happenstance, and it slowly evolved us to that reality. It's one of many. And they get to this real existential heart of the idea. And of course, Spinrad had dealt with religion in the previous vignette. So now he's starting to look at the concept of atheism and what it means if science just created us out of randomness, then we are living in a universe of happenstance, and why not mess with consciousness? Why does it matter? And he has a great quote. He says, what more could a man want than a random universe that was anything he could make of it and nothing else? And they keep talking about the void. This gets into that existential idea of void, right? That there's just void in their lives. There's no reason or purpose, and that they are artists that just take hunks of the void and turn it into art. And I think that this is Spinrad's defense of the concept of a medicated society. I think that well, let me get to the end and then we'll discuss this. The seventh vignette are two random people, and one of them is going on a really bad trip and the other one is going on a really good trip. And the one that's going on a good trip is kind of getting pissed off at the guy that is going on a bad trip. Because the guy that's going on a bad trip chose to take the trip. And the way these are described, I want to read just a couple of portions of this, because I think this is the heart of the text. Before I read it, I'm sorry. I thought that this got given away later, but it doesn't. So right before what I'm about to read, the trip that this guy has chosen to take, that's given him such a bad trip, is he decided to not take psychedelics. So he has, for the last 12 hours, not taken any psychedelics. He is completely medicine free. So this is his explanation of what it's like to not be on psychedelics. You don't understand, Kip, he said. This is reality, the way it really is. And man, it's horrible. Just a great, big, ugly machine made up of lots of other machines. You're a machine. I'm a machine. It's all mechanical clockwork. We're just lumps of dead matter run by machinery, kept alive by chemical and electric processes. So the next, I'm going to keep reading, and the next passage is juxtaposes with this one that he just talked about in a way to show exactly how the other guy who is tripping is feeling. Golden sunlight soaked through Kip's skin and turned the core of his being into a miniature stellar phoenix. The wind, through random blades of grass, made love to the bare soles of his feet. What was all this machinery crap? What the hell was Jonesy gibbering about? Man, who would want to put himself in a bummer reality like that? So, we're seeing somebody that is questioning whether or not taking all these psychedelics is actually a good choice. And he's going on a reality trip. And it's terrible. And eventually his friend's like, and he's like, I don't know why I did this. This is terrible. I'm not connected to anything. This is awful. And he's like, I don't know how to stop this. And his friend's like, I do. Take some drugs. And his friend gives him some drugs. And this is the final thoughts of the entire story. Shakily, Jonesy scooped out a cap of peyote and a 15 milligram tab of Lebamil and wolfed them down dry. How did people live before psychedelics, he said. How could they stand it? Who knows, Kip said, closing his eyes and staring straight at the sun, diffusing his consciousness into the universe of golden-orange light encompassed by his eyelids. Maybe they had some way of not thinking about it. I love this final line because I think that this story, when it comes right down to it, is Spinrad's defense of the lifestyle of the late 60s when hallucinogenics were exploding and people were really thinking about what this expanded consciousness idea meant. And I think that in the end, if I was forced to say which way Spinrad was leaning, I think he would call this a utopia. I think he would say that not only can religious people find what they need through psychedelics, but atheists can also get rid of existential dread through the use of psychedelics. And then at the end, that final line really points a finger at us, of course, who are living non-psychedelicized lives. What is it that we do to live with reality? How do we forget reality? What is it that we use instead of psychedelics like they do? What is it that we use to forget the horribleness of everyday life? It is a wild story, and I really enjoyed the ride. It could be read that he thinks it is a dystopia. I could see somebody come up with a reading that said that as well, especially with talking about the children and all that. But in the end, I think he agrees with the utopia aspect of it. Just wanted to say, very much worth a read. I really enjoyed it. There are a couple of aspects of this that did not age well. Number one, the general in the second vignette, the military vignette, is obviously of his time, a general of the 70s, and is very homophobic and uses a terrible word to describe what the soldiers are doing. That's really the kind of worst part of it. It's the only part that didn't really age that well. And I'm sure that Spinrad made the character that way because Spinrad was not a big fan of the military-industrial complex. So I think to Spinrad that was also a bad thing. But yeah, I really think this is worth a read. I think you guys will enjoy it. I know I did. And I really look forward to looking deeper into Spinrad's bibliography to see what else I can find there. All right, thank you very much for watching this video to the end. If you liked it, please click like. And if you like this kind of content, please click subscribe. We'll be making a lot more of it in the future. Thank you so much for watching.